Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. Our topic is ABAC policy as code, applying modern DevOps to policy authoring. I am Karin Hjerta at Axiomatics, and I'll be your host for today's event. I want to run through a few housekeeping notes before we get started. You are all centrally muted. We will be recording today's session, and it will be available after the event. A Q&A will be held in the end. So let's get started. We have quite a few experts with us today, and I'm happy to introduce Paul Yu, Michael Good, Farid Shalavi from NTT Data Federal, and Gerry Gebel from Axiomatics. Gentlemen, I turn over to you now and will let Gerry start this session. Now over to you, Gerry.
All right, Karin, thanks so much. And welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us for this webinar today. And we're excited to have our friends from NTT Data Federal here with us to join in the fun. I'll cover just a few baseline items here, further introductions, an overview of what we mean by ABAC, a little bit of information about our cloud native authorization capabilities, because Paul and team will be talking about this during their session here, where they review as the topic is described today, using DevOps and managing policy as code. So Paul will go through that, as well as a very interesting demonstration. And we'll also have some time at the end for questions. So please do put your questions in the question box here within GoToWebinar. So what about NTT Data and Axiomatics? Well, NTT Data Federal is a gold level partner. They've a number of demonstrated experts in the ABAC and Axiomatics technology, working with customers in public and private sectors. And we're also seeing that a number of customers are deploying our cloud native capabilities or migrating from more traditional deployment methodologies to a cloud native mode. So it's really great to have Paul and team here to show how they're doing this for customers and to share some of their experiences and how best to operate in that kind of cloud native model. So what is this ABAC, or attribute-based access control thing? Well, it's really about dynamic authorization at runtime. We have a number of protected resources or digital assets. We have access policies that are associated with them for who can access that information. And then at runtime, we enforce those policies. Attempting to access some resource, is that allowed or not? And this is applicable to a wide range of different kinds of resources, from business applications to APIs, microservices, and even down to the database level. And a further definition here for ABAC. So it's about attributes and policies, and the attributes can be almost anything, not just who you are, but things like what kind of device are you using, or if there is a time of day or location dependence on the policy, and your relation to that protected resource. So the policies are the logic of who has access or should have access, and the attributes are the inputs to this logic, where we resolve and come out with a result of permit or deny. And when we think about, okay, how do we define these ABAC policies? Well, we start with natural language statements like we have here. And Paul will be showing some samples for their demo as well. So in my case, we have the statement that brokers can view the trading positions of a customer if the broker is assigned to that particular customer. Well, we can look at this natural language statement and break it down into the component attributes that will be translated into the ABAC policy language that's used at runtime. One of the powerful aspects of this is the last segment here, where we can represent this relationship. How do you know what brokers are assigned to what customers? Well, we can do things like compare the user ID of the broker who is logged in with the information from that particular record who is the assigned broker to that. So we can have that kind of logic within the ABAC policies to make it very, very powerful. And I also want to show this basic flow here to make sure that some of the acronyms that Paul uses later on, that you'll know the definitions behind them. So when he says things like policy enforcement point or PEP, that is the code that's within the flow of an access attempt. So I'm trying to view record 123 in this protected application, and the policy enforcement point is what intercepts that flow and constructs the message to send it to the policy decision point. Can analyst view record 123? And here we've defined policies already in the system with a policy administration point, and we'll be looking at a couple of ways you do that. We can also retrieve additional information from what's known as a policy information point. So this could be a directory, a database, or some kind of REST or web service, or where we need to gather additional info to fully evaluate the request against known policies. And then our response, it gets sent back either a permit or deny. If it's permitted, of course, the flow continues. Excuse me. If it's denied, then the user will see some kind of error message. So what happens though, if you don't have an authorization service like an ABAC system for your applications to call? Well, then all of this security logic is, of course, then embedded in, hidden within your application. And this causes a number of issues, regarding lack of transparency and visibility. That is, it's very difficult to audit and certify an environment, but it's also adds additional burdens at upfront development time, because the application developers have to account for all of this logic within their code. And then, of course, things always change. Requirements around policies change, and then requires a developer time going forward. But Paul and team are going to show you how to avoid that when you externalize and manage this ABAC policy separately. So I said there were a couple of ways you can actually create and author the ABAC policies. One of them is with a graphical user interface that's easy to drag and drop and build policies from that kind of perspective. What Paul is going to show today is using the ALFA language, Abbreviated Language for Authorization. This is a domain-specific language that we created a number of years ago. And as you can see from the screen here it's more Java or C# code, like our pseudocode. So for people that are developers, they really prefer this method of authoring or managing policies, and it's a great tool for them. Axiomatics has also submitted this for standardization within OASIS, so it's actually to be part of the the OASIS standard going forward. But Paul will be showing our ALFA code today in their policy model. And then just a couple words about the cloud native authorization capability before handing it off to Paul. So as I mentioned previously, we have multiple ways you can deploy the runtime authorization service, the PDP. Typically in the past, it would be deployed in an application server container like Tomcat, JBoss, or WebSphere. And we would have a set of internal APIs that are used to automate the deployment of those servers. In recent years, in the last couple of years, we've introduced a separate option for the runtime PDP, and one that is more cloud native and adheres to those kinds of capabilities and principles. We call that the Access Decision Service. So anytime that you see ADS, that's what we're talking about. It's the cloud native PDP. So this has been stripped down to a single jar file and can be run in just a basic JVM or in a containerized kind of environment. And here's just an example of how you might run it within Google Cloud Platform. So you see we have a set of 3 ADS servers running here. and in this example, managed by Kubernetes configuration. So just a brief example of how you might run ADS, a number of them behind a load balancer, and then you can do things like manage elastic scale or manage change control through this kind of environment. So I think, Paul, with that said, we're ready to hand things over to you and the crew to go through your presentation and the demo.
Okay, great.
So I'll be back with you later for the Q&A session.
Thank you so much, Gerry, and thank you everybody for joining us today. So what we're about to show you is a demonstration of treating access control as ABAC policies as code. This is not necessarily easy to do, so because we actually need to have a running system. So we'll show you a live system that our team has built with access control, ABAC, ADS at the heart of the access control system. We will then show you the ABAC DevOps process that we developed using the ALFA code as the beginning, as source code, and then being able to version control that and using Jenkins as an automated CI/CD tool. One of the key things that I felt, because I came from the role-based inline access control logic world in my career, and one of the biggest things to overcoming ABAC is actually the inertia of the IT processes. So I hope what you walk away with from here is that you could apply normal IT software development processes to the axiomatic ALFA policies, these ABAC policies, which will overcome some resistance from the IT department. And then from the business side, you could actually see the increased productivity. We will talk about that. And with that productivity gain, you'll also see that it's much more agile to help the organization move as new business requirements come along. So we will be demonstrating a banking system that we built for actually our NTT Data financial services. They came to us and gave us a fixed price contract with a fairly tight time box, but they wanted to implement a system that was robust enough in features and realistically enough architecture that also demonstrated the powers of ABAC. So the way that you should be thinking about this is that what you're about to see is sort of like a movie set or a movie that we're going to film, where it is realistic enough to pass as if it was when the actors fill the scene. It's realistic enough, but it's really just enough to present the ideas that we have. So our actors in our movie starts with these organizations. We have a headquarter unit, and then below that, two business units, retail banking and corporate banking. And within retail banking, we have two subunits of mortgage and vehicle loan. And of course, with every organization, we have roles. We have business unit directors, CEO, business unit directors. So one of the big things that I find in the ABAC nomenclature is that it's actually incorrect, right? It's actually typically it's actually role organization access control. And that's what leads to role explosion, if you will. So even though we only have one role called business unit director, because they are assigned to the business units themselves, then it's really three different roles that we're talking about. And then we also have customer service representatives role in this film. So as our natural language requirements or rules, right? So we have the CEO able to view and edit all accounts and transactions. The business unit directors can view and edit accounts and transactions from their own business unit. This is at the business unit level, not the sub unit level. And then our customer service representative can view only the transactions from their own business unit. And they can only view the last 3 months worth of transactions, but cannot view the account ID or the customer master ID. This is what we're simulating PII. Additionally, we're not demonstrating this today, but we also have ability to limit access to the employees based on their active status. So we actually will talk about our HR system connection here. So the backlot, if you will, starts with we actually downloaded a HR system from the internet. We didn't change anything, got it to work, and loaded up our actors and their roles into, and the organizations into this system. Then we created Active Directories, both native Active Directory as well as the Azure Active Directory as identity stores, one each for each one of the business units and the headquarter unit. And then we actually implemented Radiant Logic, where we federated the identities together for the system. So Radiant Logic is the primary PIP here for our ABAC ADS server for our ABAC policies. We also have the ABAC policy talking to the HR system, I believe. So, all right. So then one of the toughest things for me when I first read the diagrams that Gerry showed you before was what is a PEP, PEP versus the PDP and so forth. So really what I'm showing you here now, the corporate banking API, vehicle loan API, mortgage loan API, and the customer master APIs, these are our policy enforcement points. They're the APIs that provide data to the UI layer. So these APIs, you might have normally built them, but now we have connected them using the REST API to talk to the Axiomatic PDP and the business policies that we wrote for our application. So all the access control logic is actually in the ABAC policy. It's not in the these APIs or the PEPs. So then the PEPs provide REST APIs to this banking portal, which is built in Java, Spring Boot, Timeleaf, and all of this actually runs in the Microsoft Azure GovCloud environment today. And of course, we hooked this up to single sign-on. Even though we only have one application, we hooked it up to Okta, and Okta talks to Radiant Logic for the identities in order to provide that single sign-on. Right. So this is the environment that we will be demonstrating to you in just a little bit. So this is just to refresh ourselves on the normal software development process, right? So normally you get a feature request from the business environment, and you track that in a tool like Jira for bug tracking or feature requests, right? Then those feature requests are assigned to a software engineering team, or software engineers will write the code using their IDEs, IntelliJ or Visual Studio code in this example. Of course, then they have to check that in, commit and push that to a source code repository such as Bitbucket, GitHub, or Azure DevOps. In order to have a CI/CD process, you actually have to have an automated build server. So in this case, we're showing using Jenkins to do that. And of course, Jenkins would compile and build a thing and build a software, produce a software artifact, and potentially could push to an app server and restart the application server, and then the QA team would test the software and you move that on, right? So this is a normal software development process that any modern software team would know. So we're just showing you that our model here is actually pretty robust, that we actually applied some normal software DevOps to this environment in order to illustrate the flexibility and the strength of the architecture, right? So I'm going to have Fareed talk a little bit about that, right?
Yeah, hi, thanks, Paul. Yeah, sure. So these APIs are all pretty much independent, and they include all the logic for the service-to-service calls to the ADS, the REST service, all the parsing logic and filtering, and as the case may be for data masking, etc., is all encapsulated within the APIs. Yeah, can you go back? Yeah, thanks. And so that decouples all of that logic, you know, within the APIs itself, which allows us to put any kind of front end. So for the demo purposes, we initially created a Spring Boot time leaf front end that integrated well with this. And then just to show the flexibility, we also put an Angular JS front end consuming the same APIs. We also had in our recent engagement with a Microsoft shop, so we delivered a sample application API in .NET Core. Their requirement, because they were going to deploy it in the enterprise, so they wanted a reusable library for the PDP connection and all the request response logic handling. So we created a separate library for them so they can use it as a dependency injection to any API that they write that would use. So it's an abstract library that they could use. So it's very flexible. So you do that in any technology that you want to use. That's pretty much it.
Paul? Yeah. So I think we just wanted to show you the flexibility, right? So the REST API, the ABAC REST API backend supports no problems in connecting to Microsoft.NET Core, right? So now I'm going to exit the PowerPoint presentation here and show you the application. So this is a normal Firefox browser that I'm showing you now, and so this tab is our portal application, and you're presented with the Okta login panel, and this is actually our HR system that we have. So you can see the list of employees that we have loaded into our HR system. I'm not going to go through the HR system because that's not the focus of our presentation, right? So the first thing I'm going to show you is I'm going to log in as the CEO. So this is the Spring Boot time leaf version. So I'm logged in as the CEO. I'm going to search for a customer using this identity here, this code here. So what we see is the customer ID brought back John Cadillac, and he has accounts with our financial institution in both the retail banking as well as corporate banking. So he has mortgage accounts with us, as well as vehicle loans and corporate banking. So our CEO, as we showed you previously in our corporate policy, is that they could view and update. So the button is actually controlled by the ABAC policy here, that we can view and update any account type, right? So here is, I can view the detailed transactions for this account type. I could update the fields that are editable here. I can save that change, and that is reflected in the transaction record. And as you see, there are 12 records on that, and I can do the same down in corporate banking. In this situation, we only have 6 records. I can edit that. So that is our CEO with very powerful capabilities across all the accounts, and you can see that they can see the account. He can see the account ID and the customer ID here. So let's log out, and I'm going to go in as the business unit director for mortgage, which is really the retail banking. So it's the same UI, different identities being used, searching for the same account or same customer record. And here we see that the bottom portion of the screen is blank because we are no longer able to see the corporate banking account for John Cadillac, because the policy that we had for business unit director was they can only see the business unit account. So accounts are related to that business unit. But they could see and update, so we have the view, and again, the view is 12 months, and they could also update or all the transaction records, and you can see the change that was made by the CEO is carried forward here. Right, so I'm going to sign out as the business unit director for mortgage, and log back in as the CSR for mortgage here. So we have the same 2 panels, mortgage and vehicle loan. Again, we did not, the requirements that we were given were not down at the sub business unit level. It was at the business unit level. So the additional policies governing CSR access were that they couldn't see the account ID or the customer master ID, so that we have masked it here. As Fareed mentioned, the PEP actually is enforcing the masking. This masking is usually in traditional applications, you probably would do this in the application UI level, but in this architecture, we were the obligation that was defined on the policy told us that this is what we needed to do for the CSR, and then the policy enforcement point, the APIs that Fareed built actually put the mask on it based on the requirements or the obligation that came back from the ABAC policy. You also see that the CSR does not have the update button. Like I said before, this was controlled by the PEP. The UI layer just respect what the PEP is telling it. And when we click into view the detailed transactions, we only are able to see 3 months worth of transactions. Again, this is row level enforcement of the ABAC policy, and the mortgage account is sort of the column level policy that we have written, right? So lastly, I'm gonna, for this demo, this portion of the demo, I'm gonna log in as the business unit director for corporate banking. So as you would expect, our policy stated that the business unit director could only see and update accounts within their business unit. So John Cadillac has 1 account within corporate banking, and we don't see the retail banking panels here. so our bug corp could see the transaction and update and remove the changes made by the CEO. Put the record back, right? So this is the bug corp capability, right? So because this was actually a real project, we demonstrated this to our, let me restart the PowerPoint here. So we demonstrated this thing to our executive sponsor. And of course, no application, just like in war, no battle plan survives first contact with the enemy. No application survives first contact with the end client, right? So he saw the demo and saw that the corporate banking business unit director could only see the corporate banking accounts. He goes, well, really, shouldn't that corporate banking guy be able to see the retail transactions so that he can make a better judgment on what the whether he should create a banking account, a corporate relationship with that customer? And as soon as he said this, this came out of his mouth, he stopped himself because we were on a fixed price, fixed schedule project. He goes, whoa, 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 I didn't mean that. I don't want this to impact your project schedule or cost more. So what time would it take to make this change, and would the system still work, right? So why would he say something like that? It is because he is not he is a traditional manager like me, that when you look at it and say, oh, in order to fulfill this requirement, what does that mean? Well, in a traditional role-based inline access control system, right, where the business control logic or access control logic is distributed in each one of our APIs and the portal, what this would mean is that every team involved with this decision would be issued the same change request, and each team would have to go through their DevOps process, analyzing the requirements, designing a solution, implementing the solution, and QAing the result, right? So this is also an important point to bring up, that what he is asking for, we actually don't have an existing, if we were doing role-based, right? We don't have an existing role that would actually fulfill this requirement. So he's asking the business unit director for corporate banking to be able to have view access to, that's similar to our CSR, which have only view access to retail banking. So we may just try to borrow the CSR for retail banking to help him do that, but there was no requirement to say only limit it to 3 months, nor was there a requirement to say hide the account ID or the customer master ID. So this will require the creation of a new role, quote unquote, demonstration, sort of the role explosion problem in the traditional world, right? And then the inline access control problem is that every team has to implement this new requirement. So what does this mean in our model with attribute-based access control with externalized policies, right? So as Gerry mentioned, we don't have to do any Java or C# code changes. We only had to change our ALFA policy. Once we write it, we QA it, and we deploy it, and it would work, right? So only one software development team has to do the work versus 4 teams in our example that have to do the work. This is where the productivity gain and the agility comes through for using this architecture. So what does this alpha code policy change or alpha code DevOps process look like? Well, it looks just like normal software development processes. So we get a policy request, we load that into Jira, and that Jira ticket is assigned to a policy engineer. The policy engineer makes the code change and checks that into the repository. So one of the key points, I really care about this portion of the process in being able to track versions of the policy is really, really important. Whereas if you use ASM and the Graphical tool, you actually have to try to manually come up with notations to track versions and so forth. Whereas here, you check it in, you know exactly what code change happened in response to a policy change request. So the innovation that we applied to this model is that we built a plugin to support this, right? So the plugin that we're going to demonstrate to you right now, in just a little bit takes the code out of the Bitbucket repository, translates the ALFA to XML and creates the domain file and actually deploys it to the ADS cloud native server. And when we first started, we actually had to restart the service before. Now we just drop it in and the service will pick it up and run. So this is what, once we got this plugin built, we were very, very excited, and that's why we wanted to share this with you with Axiomatics. And then, of course, the QA contests. Since there's no policy, no code change in the other 4 systems, really it is, you just have to verify the policy works as expected, then you would think that all of the rest of the application works, right? So our Jira ticketing system actually sits behind our firewall, so I'm not able to show that to you, even though it's just a demo system. So here is our Jira ticket as a screenshot, as suggested that Gerry suggested I do that, so I brought it over. So Michael, you can actually see on the right-hand side there is 2 commits to this Jira ticket already. So this is very similar to the policies that we said, create a UE policy to allow corporate banking business unit director to have read access to the retail banking accounts for a given corporate banking customer. So this is a Jira ticket, and Michael will be committing his changes in Jira to this, and the 2 commits that you see underneath the word development, 2 commits is our previous commits that he's made against this ticket. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to Michael for his demo.
Hey everybody. So what I have right here in front of me is our ALFA policy file. What I am selecting right here is a rule that's currently commented out, the / with the asterisk here on line 173 and on 180 denotes that this rule is commented out. So we have the rule, it's called Bud Corp Viewing Retail Banking. As Paul was talking about, our executive sponsor, added this requirement, and he was concerned that it was going to cause a lot of additional work. But thanks to the power of externalized authorization, we're able to simply add this rule in the policy without any application code change. So the rule says right here that we're targeting an action that has a value of read, a department of corporate banking, and a department of retail banking. So once I uncomment this rule, I'm going to save it, commit it, and there's a hook that connects to Jenkins that's going to trigger the job when the commit is pushed to our Git repository. So I'm going to comment this out. Then we have here in the GitHub GUI that we're going to add our Jira ticket of BNDD80, which is to add this permission for Bud Corp. So we can see right here that the only changes that we have are just uncommenting this rule. And once we push this here, going to go into Bitbucket to verify that we have the change and that it's referring to our ticket. So we can see right here that Jira is integrated with Bitbucket, and we're referring to our Grant Bud Corp Retail Banking. So yeah, no code change. And now Paul is going to show you in the applications GUI that the permissions have changed for Bud Corp, and without any code change and a simple CI/CD process using our Jenkins plugin that we created, that we converted the alpha to XACML, put the policy within a domain file, and then copied that over to the ADS server, and the permission change is pretty much instantaneous. Paul, over to you.
So hopefully this worked. I just had to refresh my screen, and this is what we have. The previous state that we had in the demo, where the Bud Corp has only access to corporate banking. So Mike, the Jenkins job ran, right?
Yeah, the Jenkins job has ran.
Okay, so we're just going to refresh the screen. No code change in the Java code or the .NET Core code. We refresh the screen, and we now have access to the retail banking accounts for John Cadillac. So we have mortgage here, and we have vehicle loans. However, different from the CSR requirements, we did not mask the customer master ID, nor did we mask the, nor did we provide the access to the update button action here in the UI for these accounts. And when we view that, we are not limited to the 3 months, right? So Fareed, did you want to add any color to how all this stuff worked and how cool it was, I guess, from your perspective when you saw this, being able to do it like this?
Sure, Paul. Yeah, if any developers are signed in, they would know that in a monolithic application, like let's say in a Spring framework, where even though you have role-based and web security context access, everything is hard-coded. You can get a role in there and use the baked-in security to allow functional permissions or view permissions. To pull something like this off, you would have to actually change the code and in various places in your controllers, in your GUI, UI, etc. But in this case, since this application was, none of that logic is integrated with the UI level layer. Everything is basically is using a Boolean permit deny based on a permission that comes in through the web APIs. For the PEPs, where they're basically recalling the endpoint, sending in the username, and it's giving us a permit deny to whether I can see a table or a button or perform a task or et cetera. And then, of course, the data is already filtered and masked appropriately. So literally, you don't have to do anything, as Paul mentioned. So it's definitely a very refreshing approach to software development.
Thank you, Fareed. And for the audience, right, all three of us, or certainly Fareed and I, we came from the traditional inline role-based approach to software development. And we went through this journey. Every time we've talked to a customer about adopting ABAC, they use the word journey, and we went through this journey and we do the reflection and we come up with value to ourselves and potentially to you as customers for adopting this. And I hope you find this insight as meaningful as we do. So let me go back to find my cursor first and go back to my PowerPoint.
And Paul, if I can just interject for a second.
Sure.
Not only were there no application or portal code changes required, you didn't even have to log out of the application, right? As you showed, you just refreshed the screen and the new access was granted. So I think that was in addition to the other
exactly right. Some of these things are, you know, as one of the old NBC commercials said, you know, on a rerun, it's old. It may be old to the presenter, us, but it's new to you. And when it was new to us, that we could just refresh the screen and the policy enforcement happened, it was amazing for us, really. Now, because we've been doing it for so long, as you say, Gerry, we sort of blow past that, but absolutely. And the same thing was true with when we do the other half of our demo, where we change the attribute on the employee, whether we change them from one organization to another or we terminated them, the system just works and keeps them from accessing the information that they're not granted access to through the policy, right? So we just demonstrated. So what did we just show you? Well, we showed you a working ABAC-based customer portal, connecting it to the Axiomatics ADS, cloud-native ADS as the policy decision point. The architecture, we showed you that it was so robust that we were able to replace our Timeleaf portal with an AngularJS version, and we also replicated one of our PEP APIs into .NET Core, and in addition, we refactored that to come up with, I think the correct term, static library to talk to the ADS REST API. So by treating ABAC policies as code, we showed you that a system could rapidly adapt to changes in regulatory or other business policy requirements. And we automated the DevOps process to move ALFA policy code directly into production in this situation, in this demo, using a Jenkins plugin that we built in support of the Axiomatics product line. And the ALFA policy is version controlled, as you can imagine, in Bitbucket, where you can see the exact changes that took place in response to a given policy request. Right. So why is this important? I think when I first got involved with ABAC, it was kind of mysterious to me because I actually couldn't spell ABAC. By making it as code, just like Gerry said, it is just like Java or C# code, and we treat the policy as code, and we have a policy process, authoring process, as normal software development. It should overcome IT resistance, software development teams' resistance to using ABAC as an approach, right? So I think we showed you the benefits in the demo. It should be self-explanatory. So I think we're back to Gerry.
Okay.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks for that, and appreciate that the demo demons were with you today. And then it's always a little risky working with live code, but it went very smoothly. So we always are appreciative of that. Before we get to the Q&A, we've got a few minutes for that. I wanted to mention that Paul, you and I have been also brainstorming about doing a follow-on webinar in early of next year, where we take this a step further and talk about how you can containerize the ADS cloud native PDP in Docker, for example, and then manage it with an orchestration tool like Kubernetes. So I think that would be a great next webinar. So I just mentioned be on the lookout for an announcement about this, and we'll be scheduling that very soon. So Paul, we've got a few questions here for you. One is, I think a pretty simple one. We'll take this one first. There was a question about what attributes were used within your policies. Certainly looks like you used department, but did you use other attributes in sorting out what was viewed on the screen and so on?
Yeah, so the entire policy set actually was not as large as you may think, and I think that's one of the advantages of ABAC. So Michael, do you want to, maybe you could actually walk through that, the attribute connector dictionary? Is that where a good place to show them those things?
Yeah, so I actually have the attributes file open right now. I could go over a few of them.
Yeah, so why don't you share that?
Sure, be happy to.
Okay, you've got control now.
Yes. So some of the ones that we used in the policy that I'm going to highlight include such things as the start date and end date for a user, because we want to make sure that only active employees are granted access to the application. That's one of those things to sort of mitigate risks such as like insider threat. People are trying to access the system after their termination date. We talked about department name. Let's see what else here. Action, of course. We're granting certain actions. We are also using an attribute for masking. Perhaps Freed will touch on this in a moment. As well as we use transaction ID and transaction date. But I think that one of the interesting ones to talk about is masking. Freed, do you want to maybe mention how you are using the obligation component of XACML to enforce masking on particular field?
Sure. Yeah. So as part of the response JSON schema, there is this optional node that's called an obligation, and that what that does is, depending on the policy, in this case, it's masking. So for a particular resource, if I receive that an obligation, and in this case with an attribute ID of masking, then I know that when I'm parsing the data in my PEP API, I would apply whatever format of masking to that particular record, and then before I then return it to the client. So that's how that works.
Yeah, and I think that's a very, very good question, by the way. That is probably the first thing that you should do, is identify the key attributes that your enterprise needs to support the policy that you have identified. My CTO, Nat Bongiovanni, says one of the clients that he used to have or employers that he worked for, they identified 12 key attributes that if those attributes were well controlled and show good numbers, the company is doing really, really well. So think about what are your crown jewels, and think about how you want to control access to those crown jewels, if you will, using the traditional English language words of who, what, where, when, why. So that's a very good question.
Okay, here's another one for you, Paul. I think it's a good one as well. So when your team first had exposure to the ALFA language, what was the kind of experience as far as how quickly can you get proficient in something like that?
Yeah, if you had, so this is one of the key things about adoption, right? So when we first started on this journey 5-6 years ago now, it actually was very daunting because as part of our training, we actually had to learn how to install ADS or ASM back then, and all the learning how to read the logs and all this stuff. But when I saw ALFA, when my team came to ALFA and I saw the similarity to Java and C#, and I assigned fairly seasoned Java programmers to the initial task, it was literally just one day of training by an Axiomatic person showing us the syntax of ALFA, and the team was able to, within a week, produce some fairly sophisticated policies, right? So it's just some, the ALFA code has meaning. The comments are not just pure comments, they actually have meaning in ASM, and the positioning of things have meaning. So those are the things you have to think about. Don't treat it like a normal Java program where you could just copy and paste and move things around. The positioning of the policies within the file and so forth has meaning when it translates to XACML. Mike, do you want to add anything to that?
I think that now, particularly with the cloud native PDP, that the ability to implement and say like a dev environment and start learning how to use Axiomatics has never been simpler, because the cloud native PDP is simply a jar file. And going back to what you're saying about learning ALFA, that was my experience as well, coming from a few years of Java. It was, I think, very easy to learn, but as you noted, Paul, that you just have to be conscious of the positioning of things within a policy. They have good documentation, and it's not too difficult to really start learning ALFA and start testing it out.
All right, excellent. That's great feedback. Well, it looks like we're at the top of the hour here, so this time is going by quickly. Paul, I want to thank you, Fareed, and Michael for joining me on today's webinar. I think it was great material, great information for our audience, and we certainly look forward to round two, moving on to the next steps of Docker and Kubernetes for managing this environment. So thanks again, and thanks everyone for joining us, and we'll see you on the next Axiomatics webinar.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.